listening to I Am Refocused Radio with your host, Shamaya Reed. This show is designed to inspire you to live your purpose and regain your focus. And now, here's your host, Shamaya Reed.
Hey, welcome to I Am Refocused Radio. We are here once again today. Just like any other day, we have another show lined for y'all. Today, we have a special guest for us, Miss Juliet Rose. She has a website. She's an author. It's authorjulietrose.com. And we're going to have an opportunity to have her tell us about her story and learn everything about her. So without further ado, Juliet, how you doing this day?
I'm doing great. How are you?
All is well. All is well. So excited to have you on. Thank you for taking time talking to us. If you can, kind of tell us a little bit about your fiction writing, what got you involved and inspired.
Sure. So I always wanted to be a writer. Even when I was a little kid, I would tell stories when I got off the bus to the other kids, and I just knew this is something I wanted to do. I was a super avid reader, and there was a kind of epiphany one moment when I realized I could be a writer. I could do what I loved. And from that point, I was always scribbling stories down. And then later in life, I decided I was ready to just really push this as my main focus.
When it comes to writing, I mean, a lot of people have specific styles. How did you pinpoint your style of writing, and how did you discover your tone of how you create these books?
It's interesting because I think that, as writers, we're always told so often that you have to write this way or you have to write that way. And there's so many rules that you're supposed to follow. And honestly, when I decided to sit down and write, I decided to just write as if I was talking, like I was telling a story. And I kind of threw all the rules out the window, at least initially, to get what I was trying to do down on paper. And then it really just grew from there. So my voice, even though I'm cross-genre, so I write different genres, people always say, it's you writing it. You just have a very specific way of writing. And that was just letting it flow and not getting too bogged down by everybody else telling me how to write.
You started young. Kind of tell us how you started as a young person. I mean, according to your bio, you were using your friends as guinea pigs to share your imagination. So how did that work out for you, and what inspired you to do that with your friends after school?
I did. And, part of it was, how kids just tell each other kind of stories like what they did on the weekend, what they did on vacation, or, different things like that. And I kind of started doing the same thing, except I lied. I just made up, what I did for vacation when we didn't take a vacation, what I was doing on the weekends when I wasn't. So a lot of it was realizing that I could get people's attention by totally making something up. And so that's what I initially did. And then when I was 10 and I realized I could be a writer, I asked my mother for a typewriter, and we found one just through the classified ads. And I just started picking away at that point because it was just something that always was in me. I'm always seeing a story somewhere. You
had support from your family, and according to your bio, you had a lot of support from your mom. What was her influence in your life, and how did that also influence your talents in writing?
My mother was a single mother. So from my earliest memories, it was really my mother, my brother, and I. So she and my father divorced when I was little. There were 6 of us kids. He took a chunk of kids. She took a couple of kids. And we just spent a lot of time together. My mother was a very intelligent and creative person. She really rocked the boat for women at that time. I remember being really young and her talking about the Equal Rights Amendment and women's rights and things like that. So as a young child, I really was just always exposed to challenging the status quo by her. She also dabbled in writing. She was a nurse, but she liked to, she would like to write stories every now and then. And so I think that definitely had an influence. So when I came to her, she was absolutely 100% supportive. She said, let's do it. Let's get you a typewriter. Never told me that I couldn't. But she did pass away shortly after that. And I was kind of shifted around to different homes. Ended up with my biological father, who was not as supportive and would say the opposite things to me, it's never going to happen. Everybody wants to be a writer, and it really did discourage me as a teenager, thinking that it was something I couldn't do. And then as an adult, I came back and said, you can't tell me what to do. I'm going to do whatever I want. And that's really when I kind of came back to it.
And that's tough to hear when someone says, everybody wants to be fill in the blank. And
right.
How did you have that mental toughness to say, you know what, this is actually something I want to pursue? How did you have the mental strength to continue to press forward to what you believe?
Well, I moved out of my father's house when I was 16. It was just not a good environment for a kid. And so I decided one night to just pack up what I could, and I left. And I struggled for a few years, but like kind of knowing that he wasn't effective as a parent let me know that he wasn't effective as a guide either. And so like I was able to say, he was telling me those things for his own reasons, whatever they might be. And I don't have to listen to that. And so like I've always been pretty strong-willed. And so part of it was like, I'll show you so that I wanted to prove him wrong.
Once again, listen on Refocus Radio. We are talking to our guest today, Juliet Rose. You can go to her website, author JulietRose.com. And when it comes to fiction writing, when it comes to developing your characters, what is your process and giving them their unique voice, and how do you approach that in your work?
You know, when I think about a character, I think about a story. There's usually like an underlying, I guess, cause for me, whether it's a social cause or maybe something I've experienced myself, you know, been around family members that have had addiction and things like that. So some of it is just like taking that and wanting to, I guess, fictionalize it so I can reach more people. Because I feel like a lot of times if you say to somebody in a nonfiction sense, this is what's going on, either they tune in because they already care, or they tune out because they don't. Where in fiction, they tend to tune in because it's a story. And so they don't need to feel, I guess, criticized. So they can say, okay, well, let me read the story and see how I feel about that. And so a lot of what I do is saying, how can I put a voice in here that's not preachy, but that is giving the character a story that somebody might be compassionate about, and maybe they wouldn't have if it was a real person. So maybe it'll open their mind to looking at the world differently around them.
You have many books that people can check out on your website, author JulietRose.com. When it comes to the theme you have with balancing pain and hope in your work, how do you strike the balance with addressing both difficult topics and also infusing hope into your narratives?
Sure. And that's a good question, because I think that, you know, we've all read a story that just made us feel terrible. Like we read it and we're like, oh, that was horrible. Like I wish I'd never read that. Or a movie. I've seen a movie sometimes where I'm like, I wish I'd never watched that, because it leaves you with such a empty feeling at the end of it. And what I want to do is I want to challenge people's way of thinking about things, but I want to leave them on a hopeful note, because we already have enough that we have to carry with us around in the world. We don't need something fictionalized that we then have to carry with us around in the world. So I'll address those topics, but I will a lot of times resolve them or give, I guess, an out to the reader by giving more of a happy ending or more of a resolution.
Being a native from New York, I mean, everybody says New York has a personality with people. What are some of the things that you use from your hometown that help you incorporate, you know, your signature, your personality in your works?
Yeah, I was moved around a lot as a kid. Obviously, you know, I didn't have a really stable childhood. So I lived with different family members, and I lived between New York and North Carolina, almost like ping-ponging back and forth with different family members. But when I got out of New York, and it was really the females in my family are so outspoken and so passionate about things, and they refuse to kind of sit quietly. And that taught me like how important it is for us to use our voices, even when we're not impacted by what we're seeing. So we see somebody going through something and it doesn't impact us. We should still say, but how can I help? What can I do to take that burden from them? And that really came from like the strength of the women in my family. And that's, I think, very much kind of a New York trait as well.
When you look at how things are changing, as far as a lot of people have access now to self-publish as an author. For you, were you a self-published author, or did you go through a publisher? What was that process for you in getting your work published?
So it was an interesting path, because I initially wasn't self-published. I had contracts with publishers, and then COVID hit, and one of the publishers I had a contract with folded. One just had weird things in their contract, and I reached out legally to just say, hey, does this seem normal? And there was definitely some clauses in there that were concerning, and so I turned that contract down. And then the third contract that I had was with a publisher who I was supposed to have a book come out with him last year, and he just kind of dropped off the map and quit communicating with his authors. So we all had to band together and get the Authors Guild involved to basically break our contracts to get our rights back. So after all of that, I was like, I don't know if I want to keep doing this, like, kind of getting my hopes up, working with publisher, and then it falls apart. And so I decided just to see, and I went ahead and published my first book. I got great response. And since it's published, I have 9 books out now with the 10th coming out next month. And I've won 43 awards. And part of the reason I did the awards was kind of to prove that point that, yes, I stepped away from traditional publishers. Writing is good. So I wanted to prove that because I think a lot of indie publishers or indie writers get maybe shoved aside a little bit because the assumption is their work isn't as good. And in this day and age, it's sometimes better.
Sometimes the grass is greener wherever you water it. So what would you say to people out there who are authors and they're worried about, self-publishing versus, trying to get a publisher?
I think that people really need to decide who they are when they decide to go into this. Initially, I didn't really want to do self-publishing because I work full-time. And it was just something where I was like, am I going to have the time if I do it myself to follow through? But I started talking to a lot of authors, all different kinds, big 5 published, small indie press published, self-published. And the one thing everybody said is, you're doing the work yourself. Like, we're past the point where an author kind of, signs a contract and then sits back and does nothing. We're still doing all of this work. And so you just really need to determine as a writer, what do you want to get out of that? For me, ultimately, I did want creative control. I do touch on some really tough subjects in my stuff, and I was afraid people would shy away from that. I wanted to know where the money was, follow the money trail back to myself instead of, wondering when a royalty was going to come in. And for example, with the author that we broke contract, his existing authors also weren't getting royalties. So it was kind of another thing to say, yes, you're really at somebody else's whim when you go with another publisher. And that might be fine. They may be great at what they do. But for me, it was really coming down to needing to have control over my creativity and know exactly, when I was going to put a book out, when I basically was going to see those payments come in. So for me, it was a no-brainer, but I totally understand if people want to go the traditional route. Like there's definitely kind of like that stamp of approval you get right off the bat if you're published through somebody else. People tend to give you a little more credence, and I didn't need that credence. I'm a little older now in my life. This is something I came back to. For me, the only person I needed to get the stamp of approval from was me.
Once again, listen on Refocus Radio, talking to our guest today, author Juliet Rose. Her website is authorjulietrose.com. You mentioned earlier about being, bouncing place to place, moving around a lot. For you, in today's world, current time, traveling, rescuing animals, you have other things that you do in your life outside of books. So kind of touch on all this, some of the things that you're focused on now in this time of life.
Yeah, I have a home, and I've definitely been more stable as far as like where I live. And that was really important coming out of such like a tumultuous childhood. It was important to me to have a home I could call my own, like a home base. But I do like to travel. And the good thing is being an author, there's a lot of events that you're traveling for. You're traveling to do book signings or conventions. So I get a lot of that kind of out of my system through traveling for the books. We do rescue animals. That definitely ties us home a lot more. We rescue primarily dogs. We have a few rescued cats and stuff too, but we rescue dogs. And they all have variety of different either medical or mental issues. And so that does require kind of like that home focus as well, which again is fine because it was something that I never really had growing up. So it's nice to have the sense of like, this is here for me. And then traveling is something I do, but I always can come home, and that's really nice.
You mentioned that you have a feature project out. I believe, if I'm correct, your most recent book, was it Stitched Together? Was that your most recent book?
That was the most recent book, and that came out in September, I believe. And it was interesting because that actually was a short story initially, and I sent it to one of my friends who reads my stuff for me, and she said, "No, you definitely need to expand this. It's really worthy of being a book." And so it's a novella. So most of my books are novels. They fall around 80,000 words. This one falls around 19,000 words. But I wanted to have something that when a younger person, whether it be a teenager or a young adult, comes up to the table and they're a little unsure about buying something, I wanted to have something that was a little shorter and maybe a little more tame for them, because it doesn't have, like a lot of my books do have, which call triggers in them. They might have drug use. They might have sexual, situations. I wanted to have something that didn't. Like I could literally hand it to a 15-year-old and know that it was safe for them to read. And so that was my most recent one. And then I have one coming out next month.
So the one coming out next month, you don't have to spill the beans if it's too early, but a sneak preview, if you can, what is the theme for this one?
This one's a little different. So I am cross genre, and I've kind of touched on a lot of things. I've done anything from, LGBTQ to, horror to supernatural. This one was one that the idea came from me. I was walking my daughter. She had a job up the street. And so I was walking her there, and we were carrying flashlights, and she went on ahead of me, and I saw her carrying her flashlight up to the place. And then I went home, and then part of me was like, what if there was somebody up there? I didn't know, so that panic kind of set in. And so that became the story of this guy who he's walking his girlfriend home. They live in the same neighborhood. They're 18 years old, have their whole life ahead of him. He walks her home, sees her get up with the light to the top of the hill, and he goes home. Well, in that time, somebody basically murdered her. So she never made it home. And the story then goes 15 years later. He's a raging alcoholic, has no purpose in his life. He has a lot of guilt. And so a lot of the story has to do with him trying to deal with his current world. And then things get worse because there's a tragedy that happens in the neighborhood, and he ends up in the care of a small child, and he keeps seeing this creature in the woods. And so his mind decides that creature killed his girlfriend. He's going to go after it. But now he has a small child with him. He has to bring with him. And so it's really this journey of soul, like him chasing after this creature, taking care of this child, really dealing with his guilt and his grief. And I'll just stop there so it doesn't tell too much, but it really is a story of humanity. And I really want to address humanity in a different way. Like if we had to look outside of ourselves, what would we see? And that's really where the story came from.
And speaking of humanity, you touched on diverse topics and situations that hits everybody, uniquely. Yeah. What would you say that you hope people appreciate from just your process of being a writer and being able to self-publish and be successful? Because not too many people can say that they publish more than one work, and let alone have an audience of readers.
We live a life where we're kind of pulled in a lot of different directions, and we're constantly being told by other people, how we should live our life, what we should do, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And really what I wanted to do was live an authentic life without kind of taking all of that into consideration, saying, what is it at the end of my life that I wanted to have accomplished? And because I wanted to be a writer, I didn't want to sit and wait for other people to tell me when it was appropriate. And that's, like I said, when I decided to self-publish, was because of that fact. I wanted to be able to do this myself. I wanted to have control of the words I was putting out into the world, since my name is stamped on it. It was a little tricky, obviously, especially when you're giving up contracts, you question, am I doing the right thing? But ultimately, I just followed my gut, and my gut told me I was doing the right thing.
Once again, you can go to her website. It's authorjulietrose.com, where you can find all information on her books, and you can leave reviews. You can also read what other people have written about her books, on feedback on her books. You also have, I would say, not one, not two, but you have many awards with your work. Kind of touch on some of the awards you have been able to receive.
Yeah, I have. So for the 9 books, I have 43 awards.
Wow.
I have, some of them have up to 7 awards, and then say stitched together when it's first award, because it's a newer book. And the reason, again, I decided to go for awards initially was for my own vetting process. Since I was going indie, I wanted to prove to myself that I was worthy of putting a book out. But then eventually it helped other people say, okay, yeah, this obviously has won awards. It's been vetted. I've won so many, I can't remember all of them, but I've won some of the big ones like the National Indie Excellence Awards, the Independent Publisher Awards, and then some smaller ones that I just really liked what they were standing for, like the Firebird Awards. I like that they take the entry fee that people pay and they give it to homeless shelters to give personal items to like kids and women that are staying in homeless shelters. So I really like them because of what they were doing with it. And the problem with awards is there's a lot of kind of sketchy awards out there. So you have to do your research if you're going to do it. And I went through the, it's called ALLI. It's the basically Alliance of Independent Authors. And they had a list of like, yes, we've kind of tested these ones out. We vetted them. They seem legitimate. And that's really where I decided to go with specific awards.
Someone who's new to this as an author, how do they even go about with trying to get noticed? Because you have a clear path of understanding how to reach these organizations and to get recognized. So what would be your words of wisdom to any author out there who just want people to recognize their hard work and quality that they put out into the world?
I think it's really important to meet other writers, especially ones that are maybe more like experienced or been around, because they can give a lot of good advice. I wrote in my 30s, and then I got divorced and I went through like a single mom period where I didn't write for a lot of years. And when I came back to it, everything had changed. Like everything I knew no longer existed because we'd moved into a digital world. When I started, we weren't really in that digital world. You were still getting books from the library and things like that to do research. So, I just came back into it with a very open mind and just said, hey, I'm kind of new at this. Can you just give me advice? And one thing I'll say is, authors in general are really supportive of each other and they'll teach each other things that did work, things that didn't work. Watched a lot of YouTube videos. I did a lot of research just to kind of get an idea of where I should put my energy and where I shouldn't put my energy. But a big part of it was talking to other authors. That's how I found out about conventions. That's how I find out about events. It's just, someone's like, I'm going to be doing this event. I'm like, okay, let me bookmark that real quick, come back to it and see if it's something I can do. So it's a good way just to really grow your knowledge base. It's just to communicate with other authors.
You make it sound easy. I'm sure it was the opposite, right?
Exactly. Yeah, it wasn't easy. And there was a lot of misses. I think you learn as much from your mistakes as you do from your successes. And there was plenty of stuff that I did that I was like, well, that didn't work. I won't do that again. And then things that did work or things that, I wasn't sure, but I'd figured give them a second try. So it's a lot of time and sometimes money that you're trying to figure things out till you find out what works.
And my last question for that is, you mentioned how some of them you miss. So on that point, when it comes to like having those failures, right? You had this goal to do this and do that, and then it pan out the way you wanted to. Based on your own experience, how did you navigate from those situations into seeing, the hope, the light at the end of the tunnel, like, what, this is still what I want to do, and I'm going to still keep going forward?
I think you can't build yourself up too much with an expectation. Say, like, for example, I did a convention and I was very excited about it because a lot of writers I knew were doing the convention. And I went and I did it and it was lovely. People were nice. However, didn't really sell any books. And so it was one of those things where I initially felt like stupid. Like, should I have done this? It was a waste of money. Is this really, and then I had to remind myself, you never know. What is it, the saying, like, you miss all the chances you don't take? It's true, though. Like, you have to try different things out and determine if the thing wasn't working or you weren't working. Maybe you came into it with the wrong mindset or the wrong product, or you did, whatever it is, you didn't reach out to enough people. So you have to take every situation, good or bad, and analyze it and say to yourself, what went right? What went wrong? What could I do differently? And that's how I tend to view going into anything that I'm unfamiliar with.
It sounds like you came with a business mind, because it's one thing to like writing, it's another thing to like writing and also carry all those different hats. I know I said last question, but I had to have a follow-up question real close. But when it comes to carrying your product with you, your brand with you, and you're writing theme and skills, you have to wear all those multiple hats too. So at one day you have to have the business hat on, and the other day you have to have your creative hat on. How did you balance both?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think a lot of creatives have a hard time with, and even I did. I mean, I'm also like a visual artist. I paint. And there's been plenty of times where I sat at an event with my visual art, and I'm an introvert, and people would walk up and I wouldn't really engage with them. And so they'd leave. And so I had to say to myself, what am I trying to do here? Like, yes, I'm a creative and I paint these, beautiful skateboards. I write these stories, but like, unless I'm really telling people about that, I'm not going to sell it. And so no business is going to sell anything if they keep their doors closed. And we are our doors. So we have to open those doors when people come around, and we have to talk to them. And that was my biggest challenge. But since I've really focused on that, I've seen the difference in my sales.
Man, we just got the exclusive sauce right there. So once again, talking to our guest today, you can go to her website, author Juliet Rose. How can people, if they want to contact you, if they just want to reach out and give you feedback or have questions, if you're doing tours or anything, best way they can keep in touch with you?
Yeah, that website, authorjulietrose.com, has links to all of my social media. It has my email link. I usually try to keep an update of events that I'm doing, is why I need to actually update it right now. But because we're getting into the new year and things are starting to ramp up. So I'll be adding a lot of events to that page. But that is really the best place because I try to put everything there. So if someone's trying to reach me, they can get into that page and, like I said, directly contact me or buy a book or set up an event.
Awesome. Once again, Juliet, I want to say thank you for your time.
Thank you so much.